Hi guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we've got a Perfumers portfolio video on one of the most important classically trained French perfumers that you could think of, Guy Robert, who didn't have a whole bunch of creations. You could fit all of his creations easily on one table. They fit nicely into one page, but what he did create were absolute 10 out of 10 masterpieces. And so I want to talk about some of these. Obviously, I want to highlight the man. But if you've been following my channel for any amount of time, you know that I'm all about blazing my own path. I don't want to do what the YouTube algorithms say. I don't want to say things to get likes or to, I'm not trying to make this channel into a business so I can quit my day job or anything like that. This is a hobby for me. This is a hobby that I plan on staying true to myself with, and I want to stay true to you guys with as well. And that's why I pretty much want to talk about fragrances that, even if they're off the beaten path, even if, they don't get hyped in the YouTube community, I don't care. I don't wear fragrances or talk about them because they're hyped. In fact, I like to go against the stream. If all the fish are going the same way, I want to go the opposite. I want to go against the stream. Against the stream of all the fish going the one way, I want to go the opposite way. And so I'm going to talk about my scent of the day first before we do a Perfumers portfolio video on Guy Robert. This one's a little bit of an underrated, under the radar scent. You know that I love my vintage fragrances. This is a long discontinued fragrance from 1979, and it's from the house of Roberto Capucci, and it's called Punjab. Now, the advertising with this, some might say, is offensive. I don't find it offensive. The advertisement of this, basically the tagline was "for conquerors," okay? And they're saying, oh, it's for conquerors, like you're going to conquer a nation, like you're a, like you're an imperialist. I disagree with that. I don't think that's the way that I take it. I take it as you're going to conquer what's important to you in your life. You're going to go conquer your important project, your job. You're going to conquer being a man and being there for your family, or whatever is in your life. You're going to conquer being the best basketball player you could be, or the best poet, or whatever it is. That's the way that I view that advertising. I don't view it as an imperialistic, offensive ad campaign. Not for me. I actually like the ad campaign, and I love the fragrance. Now, this fragrance is completely out of date as far as what's popular today, because this fragrance came out in 1979. By the way, some of the fragrances that it was competing with, which I should mention real quick, number one year earlier came out Polo Green, which this is one of my favorite vintage masculines of all time. Even smelling it from the cap, I absolutely adore Polo Green. It has this masculine, vibe about it. I've often described this fragrance as, this is how a man should smell. Man should not smell like bubblegum and syrup and pralines. This is a man's perfume. So is Capucci Punjab, by the way. Even though they're different fragrances, they give the same impression, if you will, right? To my mind. Another fragrance that gives an impression of it is this. If you know Yatagan, this is probably the closest creation I can name as far as in the same fragrance category or the same fragrance sandbox. It's trying to do something very similar. They go about it a little bit differently, and you can sense that in the name, because Punjab is basically a region. It's considered a region of the world, right? And that region of the world is famous for spices and stuff like that. So if you've ever heard me describe Caron's Yatagan, you know that I describe it as disturbing a forest floor where, the leaves have sat undisturbed for weeks or maybe even months, and then you come along and kick the leaves up and you get that smell of a little bit of like rot underneath, right? Underneath there was that decomposing ground, decomposing leaves. In the fall, maybe, you know, it's a little damp, a little moist, that kind of smell with castoreum. And the castoreum note here is very important. It's probably one of the reference castoreum perfumes, along with Antaeus for me, and probably Leonard Pour Homme. Those three are some of my favorite castoreum fragrances, and maybe even Van Cleef & Arpels Pour Homme. I think that uses a castoreum note as well. Punjab does something kind of similar, but instead of this big heavy castoreum note, you get that leather accord that you tend to get in Yataghan that castoreum can create, but I don't think they're using a big heavy castoreum here. What you get is you get this blend of green aromatic herbs in the opening with lots of spices, but not so much where it's overwhelming. Like if you watched my first impression on Prin Anthamara, I couldn't take the spices there. It was too much turmeric, too much whatever they're using, curry. Here, the cumin, the juniper, the marjoram, the artemisia is very nicely blended to my mind with some of the greener notes like pine. You get this beautiful cinnamon, which kind of meshes very well. If you've smelled some of the cinnamon heavy fragrances that I love, like I talk about the cinnamon use in Z14 or Clive Christian's X for Men, or there is a beautiful cinnamon note in Romeo Gigli per Uomo. That kind of cinnamon heavy, but imagine you're mixing it with these other ingredients, these other heavier Southeast Asian herbs. Punjab, it's going for the name, right? And then the base is the most important part. I almost got a little bit of smoke right here, which I haven't gotten very much of the smoke all day, but there is an olibanum accord in the base. So instead of castoreum and that decomposing leaf smell in Yataghan, you know, the fragrances are very close, but they kind of go about the way they attack it different. And so here you get a little bit of that 70s leather that I just absolutely love. Masculine to the core, you know. Beautiful 70s leather mixed with a huge dose of oak moss, which they could do back in the day. And oak moss is an important part of this composition. Balsam fir, which mixes with that pine and gives you a slight reminder of something like Polo. Again, the cinnamon will remind you of something like Z14 or something like that. And then you get this ambery myrrh and olibanum in the base. And I love olibanum, but for the first time, I sprayed this maybe an hour ago, and it has a pressurized atomizer, by the way. So Roja Dove, eat your heart out on this one. Because the atomizer on this blows the pressurized atomizers on the Rojas away. And this is from the 70s. So that just goes to show it's an amazing fragrance. And yeah, I'm getting a little bit of this smoke now, which I haven't been getting all day. So now that I did a fresh spray, I'm getting some of that smoke, and it's mixing with the leather, patchouli, geranium. It's so good. I'm a huge fan. And so the good thing about this is very few people talk about this. I've seen Rich Mitch talk about this on his channel. Now I'm talking about it, but this is not something that's being hyped. You know, it's not something that the vintage hunters are going and jacking the price up to $1,000 a bottle like Patou Pour Homme. You can still find these for respectable prices. So this is all the juice I have, which is honestly enough for me. You know, but if you're into the kind of stuff that I'm into in the vintage world, if you're into the Yataghans, if you're into the Polo Greens, you know, if you're into the Halston fragrances, that kind of 70s, early 80s, Leonard Pour Homme, Van Cleef & Arpels Pour Homme, I would check this out. I would certainly check this out. It sits kind of in its own. It stands on its own 2 feet, and even though there's some heavy elements to it, it's going to be 98 degrees here in Texas today. and I'm wearing this with a smile. I don't care, you know. I'm starting to just wear whatever I love. Forget the weather. I can't mess with the weather anymore because it's stopping me from wearing some of my favorites, and I just have to wear what I want to wear. So that is my scent of the day. A quick little vintage ramble before we get into master perfumer Guy Robert's portfolio. So let's talk about Guy Robert first before we start talking about his fragrances. So I pulled up a almost like a little blurb that Lucky Scent did on the man, and it's interesting because here's what it says. And if you think something sounds off, it does. There's a lot of wrong in this blurb, but this just goes to show how little they are respected, how little the perfumers are respected nowadays. So, and this is one of the best perfumers of all time, by the way, by his peers considered to be one of the great classical French perfumers, right up there with Edmond Rudnitska, some consider. And they can't even get a blurb right on him. Born into a famous family of perfumers, the legendary Guy Robert was the second head perfumer for the house of Chanel, where he created such enduring scents as Chanel Pour Monsieur and Number 19. Later, he helped Hermès rise to prominence as a fragrance house with the creation of Kalesh. He went on to compose fragrances for Rochas, Dior, where he created Dior Essence, Gucci, Amwage, and The Pink Room. He was also well known as an author, magician, and even a highly trained gourmet chef. Robert passed away in 2012. Now, he was not the famous in-house perfumer or the second head in-house perfumer of Chanel. That was his cousin or nephew, I believe, Henry Robert. So they couldn't even get his name right. He didn't do Number 19. He didn't do Pour Monsieur. So anyways, they couldn't even get a blurb right? And what's funny is this is this leads me to a perfect point in that this is one of the reasons I want to do these perfumers portfolio videos, is I want to highlight the men and women who are creating the scents that you and I know and love. That's one of the reasons that I'm doing this. I will share with you guys that I got a very uplifting email today from Nathalie Lorson. And she emailed me and she said, hey, I just found your perfumers portfolio video that you did. And I did that video many months ago when I was in my old office before I had this set up behind me. And she said, thank you. It was great. I'm glad you enjoy my work. Thank you. It was an honor and all this good stuff. And it was an honor and a privilege that I got to watch you, do this video on me, basically. And I was floored. I wrote her back and basically said that you made my day. Forget it. No, you made my week, is basically what I said. Right, just hearing from you that you enjoyed my video made my week. So that's why I'm doing this, because they deserve much more credit and love and appreciation than they get. And, there were many other people who felt that way. Frederick Malle, for example, was so angry that I believe it was Edward Fleischier did not get the credit for Poison. He did not get the credit for Poison at the launch in 1985, that it ended up setting him on a path to where he created the house of Additions de Parfums, Frederick Malle. So, I just feel like it's a great way to give a tribute to the men and women who make this craft an art form. So let's talk a little bit about some of the creations that I found from Guy Robert. Now, so let's start with the first one, which I know because I have a little bottle here, and this is a vintage bottle. This is Kalesh. And this is a 25 ml bottle. I need to know it a little bit better. But I will tell you, before we start talking about notes and stuff, I'm going to go a little bit out of order here. Usually I like to do these in chronological order. But one of his perfumes, Guy Robert's perfumes, I'm so in love with that I want to save it to the end, okay? And so Kalesh, I found a couple quotes from Guy Robert, by the way, that I'm going to try to share with you throughout the video without them seeming strange and out of place. But one of the quotes was, he was talking about his second creation for Hermès, because he created a fragrance called Dobles, I believe, which is very rare and hard to come by. I'd love to smell that one day. So this is 1961, Kalesh. And it says that the idea was the same as the inspiration for Madame Rochas, which he also did and I've never smelled. A soft, flowery perfume. But I started from a product that was more of a chiffre. He explained Kalesh was inspired by Fruit Vert, a once successful perfume created for Florel by Pierre Cardin, which I think was also the starting note for Ma Griffith in 1946. Fruit Vert was a light green chiffre in the direction of Crêpe de Chine from 1925, but it had only a touch of oak moss, and its flowery notes were poor and distressing. I kept the light chiffre nuance, but strengthened the iris and vetiver wood notes, and added a rich accent of lily of the valley to a heart of natural jasmine. A touch of mandarin woke up the bergamot top notes, while cypress gave more body to the vetiver. So, Kalesh, even though this is a feminine fragrance, I would have no problem wearing something like this. It's a floral chiffre, but Guy Robert's floral chiffres have a little bit of weight to them, you know, a little bit of depth. He talked about turning up the vetiver note a little bit. In the breakdown, in the opening, you get a beautiful aldehydic floral type opening with cypress, like he said, and mandarin orange to mix with the bergamot, neroli, orange blossom. And then you come to the gardenia, iris, which I love, jasmine, lily of the valley, rose, ylang ylang, amber, oak moss, musk, sandalwood, tonka bean, vetiver, and cedar. And so it's a floral chiffre basically with an aldehydic opening, and he turned up the vetiver, like he said, and I like the fact that that vetiver being turned up a little bit makes it where I have no problem wearing. I would wear this out and about, absolutely no problem. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous. It's not my favorite DNA, that's the thing. As you can see, I much more prefer to wear something like this, my scent of the day. This is much more me. This is what I enjoy wearing, these vintage masculines more. But this is still, you have to, if you're a fragrance lover, you have to smell some of these old masterpieces. And Kalesh is a great starting point. That is 1961. Okay, now we're going to jump to 1970. And before we do that, I actually want to read a quote that Guy Robert had been asked once. So someone asked him, what makes a great fragrance? And he said, a good perfume that had the luck to be chosen by the right person in the right company at the right time. And he said that a perfume must, above all, smell good. That was his mantra. So he created Hermès Equipage in 1970. This is a vintage bottle. This is what the older bottles look like. But honestly, this fragrance, I think even the new formulation would be just fine. And this is one of those situations where there was a flanker of Equipage created by Jean-Claude Elena called Equipage Geranium. And I've really taken to this even more than the original. The original starts off a little bit, for me, a little bit old manish. Now, it does kind of correct itself as the hours tick by, as you know, time progresses and the fragrance begins to dry down. But the opening of Equipage can be tough, and if you don't have some experience with perfumes, you very well may spray Equipage and go, nope, definitely not for me. Because Equipage keeps this aldehydic opening, but the whole plan was to amp it up with this woody, spicy accord. So you get this rosewood, which I usually love, but it's very watery. There is a carnation note here, but it doesn't have that beautiful powderiness that I love in fragrances. Like, for example, if you go back to Guerlain, Abbey Rouge has one of my favorite carnation accords with leather. This uses carnation and mixes it with a classic spicy woody base, oak moss, patchouli, tonka, vanilla, vetiver, stuff like that. And so I need to wear it more. I need to spend more time with it. But these two, Kalesh and Equipage, out of all of his creations, these are the ones that I still need to spend some more time with. They're not my favorite, at least not at this point. And one day, I plan on doing a comparison video between these two. I'll wear the original Equipage on one hand, and I'll wear Equipage Geranium on another. I think what Jean-Claude Elena did here is, I think he added a sandalwood note, a modern sandalwood note that adds some mystery, you know, it adds some intrigue. It's a little harder to pin down. This feels a little citrusy, light, even though there are some spices, there's cinnamon, there's pine needles in here. I always want more when I wear Equipage. You know, it's like my nose always is trying to hunt for that special thing in there, and I never get it. And in 1970, for masculines, remember, Eau Sauvage was huge in '66. This is what was competing directly with a fragrance like Eau Sauvage. This is only 4 years later, and this is what was popular. You know, and while this may not be the vintage formulation that men were wearing back then, it still has this, you know, citrusy, ethereal, fresh, you know, watery, easy to wear. You know, you could easily see Jean-Claude Elena's style being born out of his master Edmond Rudnitska's creation in something like Eau Sauvage. I much more prefer Eau de Hermès. You've heard me say that a million times, but that's what Equipage was competing against. And it does have a little bit, you know, when I wear it, I do get a little bit of this outside, you know, you're standing in a forest, you're standing amongst a bunch of trees, you're smelling the leaves, you're smelling the wood, you know, you're an outdoor kind of guy. It has that because of the rosewood and the pine. It gives the feel like you're out and about in nature. Kind of like there's a fragrance that Hermès put out, again, even later, which is called Rocobar. And this does basically the same thing. It gives you that feel of, you know, being out and about, being out in a horse stable. Honestly, I even prefer Rocobar to Equipage, but that's just my personal taste. I think Equipage, for what it does, you know, absolutely must be respected as one of the pillars of early Hermès masculines. So that's Equipage. Then we're going to jump to Amouage, and then we're going to jump to two newer discoveries that I've really been smitten with. So in 1983, basically the story goes that the House of Amwage, the Sultan of Amwage, whose name I used to know, but it's very long. The Sultan of Amwage wanted to bring Middle Eastern perfumery back on the map, right? And he wanted to hire a French nose, right? And he wanted to hire one of the most revered French perfumers to create this fragrance for Amouage. And Guy Robert ended up being picked. So what Guy Robert did, and by the way, Guy Robert had a love of Arpege by Lanvin, which I actually have a vintage extrait on the way. I can't wait to get that and break into it. It's sealed. So I'll break into that for you guys on a video, and we'll do maybe a first impression or something. So 1980, early 80s is when Amouage created their first fragrance, which was called Gold, because it was supposed to be the best fragrance, the best ingredients that came from the country. So it's supposed to be the best frankincense, the best floral notes, the best, ambergris, civet, all that good stuff. And he succeeded in this. Some people consider this his best creation. I would have considered this his best creation had I not discovered some of the older fragrances that he has done that I didn't understand or know about in the past. So the women's version of Amouage Gold, which this is a vintage bottle, by the way, you can see there that it says Gold Woman, and it says made by Amwage LLC, Sultan of Oman. So that's it, Sultanate of Oman. The newer bottles of Amwage obviously don't show that. They show Sabco or something like that, because there was some sort of buyout of Amwage. They went through some sort of merger with another company or whatever it is. But these older bottles just literally say Sultanate of Oman, because the Sultan owned the brand of Amouage for the longest time outright. So it turned into Sabco Group / Oman Perfumery. That's what it is. And what they did with Gold Woman is they took Lily of the Valley, which he used beautifully in Kalesh, and they took Lily of the Valley and they mixed it with rose, frankincense, beautiful frankincense, orris, jasmine, myrrh, ambergris, musk, sandalwood, cedar, and civet. And this has this animalic floral quality to it, right? So it has this oriental feel underneath, because you get this, this heavy feel of musk, frankincense, myrrh, that kind of thing. But it has this this beautiful powdery white floral that normally I'm not a big fan of. But the way that it's blended here, and the way that you get some of the civet comes out and adds this extra bit of animalic, vibe that just kind of saves the perfume. You know what I mean? I love Amouage Gold. I'm a huge fan. And this I actually got because I did not have the women's version, and I wanted it as a reference. And I'll tell you what, probably, unless you're a big-time collector, you probably don't need both the women's and the men's version. I ended up scoring this one as well. This is Amouage Gentleman's EDT, or Gentleman's Cologne, if you will. And this came out in 1993. The original came out in 1983. And Gentleman's Cologne takes Amouage Gold and it just freshens it up with citruses, and it freshens it up with geranium, sandalwood, stuff like that. But the base of this is real Omani white frankincense, and it's amazing. The frankincense in this is some of the best frankincense I've smelled. The problem with this fragrance for me is they tried to make more of a cologne style, so they took the civet out. They took the animalic part out, which I love. And that's why my favorite Amouage Gold iteration is still this. Just the regular Amouage Gold. This is my favorite one because it keeps that civet note that I love so much. It keeps the masculine oak moss, the amber, the frankincense, the myrrh. I love this fragrance. I think this is a fantastic fragrance, and this is a made in England bottle, made in the UK. It's not a made in Oman, and they still did a fantastic job here. So it's not a vintage, it's a magnetic cap, and I still love it. So, for all you folks who are on Ramsey's gatekeeper and he won't talk about anything new, that's not true at all. Even the magnetic cap version is fantastic for me. this does it for me. I mean, I'd love a vintage non-magnetic cap, but there's no need. This is so good. But it is one of, if you don't like powder, if powder is not your thing, you will not like this fragrance. It's going to be a challenge to you. The civet is going to be hard to deal with. You know, the powderiness of the lily of the valley and jasmine, the indolic jasmine is going to be hard for you to deal with. So that is Amouage Gold Man. Now, the last two are newer discoveries for me. They are both discontinued in these forms that I'm going to show you. I think the final one you can still buy, but it's a remake by Francois Demachy. But let's start with the Gucci. So this is Gucci Pour Homme from 1976. Now, he made a fragrance called Gucci Gucci number 1 in 75, and he made it for Aldo Gucci. And this fragrance I just got. If you've watched my unboxing, you know, from a couple days ago, this is a brand new purchase. However, I did get a chance to spray it on and wear it. I haven't worn it as a scent of the day yet, but I will very soon. But this is 1976. So many people say that Amouage Gold was his perfection of earlier perfumes. I don't believe that, but I do think that this is his perfection of Equipage, okay? That's my take. I think he took Equipage and he perfected it with Gucci Pour Homme 1. I like this a lot. This has this lavender, lemon, citrus combo, and it has that carnation I was hinting about in Equipage, but the way that it's used here is how I like it. So it uses the carnation and the spices with heavier notes underneath. And that's where I love Guy Robert's creations, when he takes he has this beautiful classic style where, you know, everything he does, you know, one of the commenters of my channel who you know will know well because I pin every single one of her comments because they're so fantastic, Emile, she basically said that Guy Robert's fragrance compositions are so well thought out and so perfect in nature that they cannot be ruined by reformulation. Even the new stuff is going to be good. And I can see what she means there, because he does have this classic style to him. But it takes so this fragrance basically takes the lavender, the citruses, the carnation, which I love, and it adds a little bit of depth underneath it. It adds that depth that my nose is looking for in Equipage. So it has leather, it has labdanum, it has vanilla, tonka, and oak moss. And the fragrance that I'm reminded of here is Guerlain's Abbey Rouge. This reminds me of his take on a style of Abbey Rouge. Now, Abbey Rouge is one of the best fragrances of all time. I prefer the EDT, but I don't think it can be improved upon. But this is one that I wanted to have as a reference, and I'm very glad to have even the little bit of juice that I have. I'm glad to have it. But I enjoy this more than Equipage because it keeps that woody, spicy structure he was going for with Equipage, and it adds a little bit more of this like resinous undertone, which you'll see again in the final fragrance. And I think he really kind of, when he did that with his fragrances, he perfected that style for me, for my taste personally. Now, you may love Equipage, and you may hate Gucci Pour Homme, the original from 76. For me, beautiful. I absolutely love this perfume. And there are still bottles floating around at a reasonable price. I did not pay an arm and a leg for this partial bottle. So you don't have to feel like you are, you know, going to have to go mortgage your house or anything to get it. But it is discontinued, of course. I mean, you are on my channel. What more do you expect? It is long discontinued, but that style I appreciate. I like Gucci Pour Homme 1, and then my favorite, my absolute favorite of his that I think is his greatest creation, and you cannot get this bottle anymore. You'd have to find this secondary because this version is discontinued, but now Demachi reformulated it for Dior. It's a floral chiffre called Dior Essence. And Dior Essence is, I was just, oh my God. I was just so smitten with Dior Essence. I was shocked, actually. When I first got this and I sprayed it on and wore it, I was shocked at its beauty. Because, again, this is 1969, so we're going to go back in time a little bit. But this has this aldehydic floral chiffre structure, right? So he's playing in familiar territory again. But he did something here that I think just is a stroke of genius. He almost made the base almost like a bit of an oriental base, right? So it takes that aldehydic, citrus, floral, there's a beautiful cinnamon note here that adds this spiciness, this depth. It adds this roundness to it. It almost feels like you can. It almost feels like you can sink your teeth into this fragrance. Like it has that kind of depth to it. You know what I mean? This is not a thin fragrance. I was trying to describe Equipage. Very hard to describe Equipage for me, but it has this this almost like paper thin, this you spray it on, you have this thin veil of citrus. It's a 70s masculine fragrance, not meant to offend, just meant to be there for you kind of thing. In the old days, men didn't wear perfumes that were supposed to project and that kind of stuff, and it had that kind of that quality that kind of kept to itself, that classic French, classically trained French perfumer who was doing everything classy, didn't want to put something out that was going to offend or anything like that. That's Equipage. Here, he stepped out of the box. On Dior Essence, he stepped out of the box, and I feel like he really did something special. Dior Essence has this shape-shifting like quality to it. One moment you smell it, and it's a floral fragrance. The next moment you smell it, and you get this beautiful chiffre structure, this lovely oak moss, labdanum, bergamot, classic chiffre structure, right? And then another time you smell it and you get this oriental-like vibe. You get benzoin, styrax, vanilla, that kind of stuff. And there is a perfume that I kind of felt the same way about, and that is Guerlain's Chamade. I need to wear this more. This is something that I need to spend more time with, because I don't think you can just spray it on like I did when I first got it and understand it. So for some reason, though, even though these two fragrances, both released in 1969, by the way, these two fragrances share some sort of, there is a connection, there's a kindred spirit between these two perfumes, okay? When I sprayed this one on, it's instant love. This one, I'm going to have to take a little bit more time with, but I could see it growing into the love that I have for Dior Essence. I could see myself ending up peeling back the layers and understanding this, but I haven't spent the time with it yet. But there are some, again, these two perfumes are kindred spirits. So, there's a couple more quotes I want to read you from Guy Robert before we go that I thought were very interesting. The first is that he was a musician. He was also a classically trained chef, okay? And, you know, a good cook, cooking has a lot to do with perfume in the sense because the mouth and the nose are all somewhat interconnected. You smell something, you can almost taste it. You taste something, you can smell it, that kind of thing, you know? And he also wrote a book about his best perfumes. So if you get a chance to find his book, you should check it out. He wrote a book about his favorite classics, if you will. And he was a fourth generation perfumer. Most people don't realize that, but his grandfather provided Francois Coty with some of his first perfumery lessons. How's that for being, you know, in the how's that for being in the club, if you will? And his partner, Joseph Robert, and his partner Massignon patented the solvent extraction process that resulted in the production of the first pure absolutes. So, I mean, he's coming from a very prestigious perfume family, if you will. And Coty was very impressed. He knew nothing about raw materials initially, but he thought, you know, his grandfather's fragrances were wonderful. And let's see, I think there was another quote I wanted to run by you guys, but I wasn't very well, I didn't have it all prepared here, so we'll just forget about the final quotes and close by saying that Guy Robert, to me, is every single one of these fragrances that we talked about, even though you can see there's not a whole lot. I'm missing a couple, but we've got Kalesh, we've got Amwage Gold, we've got Amwage Gold Man and Gold Woman, and then we've got Gucci Pour Homme 1, and we've got Dior Essence. Every single one of these is a must sniff for a perfume lover. I would say try to get your nose on this version if you can, because even though I hear that the new version is quite nice, equally nice, Dior Essence, this version I can vouch for. Fantastic, fantastic fragrance. So, that's my Perfumers portfolio video on Guy Robert. I hope you found it insightful, appreciative. If you have experience with his fragrances, please leave it below in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts. I love seeing your faces in the comments. I learn more from you guys than you do from me. All the good stuff you've heard me say a million times. So if you've gotten something out of this video and you appreciate what I'm doing here, a like and a subscription always helps, but obviously it's not necessary. It is just something I think that maybe helps a channel, a small channel like mine, you know, kind of get recommended to people when they're looking around YouTube. I'm starting to see more and more people come on that say, hey, I'm binge watching your videos, or where have you been, or that kind of thing. You know, we need more people who I think have a true love and passion for the art of perfumery, and that's missing. And because it's not about, you know, it shouldn't be about views or likes or, you know, how many subscribers you have. It should be literally about sharing the passion of perfume. And sometimes if you can find a perfumer, and instead of hunting down brands, or instead of trying to hunt down the newest thing, if you can just find a perfumer and hunt down their works individually, you get a better feel for the person, for the creations, than you could ever do by just buying Amouage fragrances or Gucci fragrances. You know, because the perfumers used to be afterthoughts, you know, in the old days. No one mentioned the perfumers in the old days. You were buying a Gucci. You were not buying a Guy Robert, right? That kind of thing. And so now that you know these are his creations, if you're a fan, I would urge you to hunt these down. Especially from an art form, from studying the old fragrance compositions, from getting to know them. You know, that way when you smell something, if you smell Abbey Rouge and then you smell the original Gucci Pour Homme 1, you can make that connection that I think that I made. Now, I could be completely wrong. You could say, Ramsey, you have no clue what you're talking about. There is a lot of subjectivity in this hobby. But that being said, if you don't know about these fragrances and you just go blindly into the niche world, which it's a Shark Tank out there nowadays. So you go blindly into the niche world and you just start buying things, because that's what happens when you fall in love with this hobby. You just want to own everything, which is impossible to do. You can't own everything, but that's why it's important to start with the classics. It's important to have a foundation. You know, it's very hard to get to the next step before you go to the first one, right? You have to go one step at a time. That's the reason why they don't just take somebody on a helicopter and take them up to the top of the mountain. If it's a very large mountain, if it's Mount Everest, they won't be able to breathe up there. Their body hasn't adjusted. You know, you have to climb a little bit, and then you have to make camp and wait a day or 2 or 3. Let your body rest. And then you have to climb a little bit more and make camp and let your body rest. And then you have to climb a little bit more, then you can get to the peak. If you just take a helicopter up to the peak, you'll faint, you'll pass out. Your body won't be able to stand the altitudes, right? That's what happens to people in the niche in fragrance world in general, is they realize they love this hobby, but they've never smelled Dior Essence. They've never smelled Kalesh. They've never smelled Gucci Pour Homme 1, Amouage Gold, that kind of thing. They've never smelled Chamade. And they just go run blindly, and they just buy these fragrances because they're $500, $700, $300, and they don't realize whether they're buying something amazing or crap. They have no frame of reference. And that's what this channel is hopefully about. Hopefully I can help give you guys a frame of reference so you understand the history that came before. That's my goal in this. And so you guys know I'm not a trained perfumer. I'm not in the craft in any way other than the fact that I'm a pure perfume lover. I'm a fragrance lover. And, you know, some would say addict, but fragrance lover for sure. And so that's my goal in all this, is I want to share that with you guys. And so I hope you can appreciate that. Like I said, I love going through back and forth and learning about the perfumes from you guys. A lot of these I wouldn't have purchased without recommendations from people. And that's what the community is about. The community is about sharing knowledge, sharing information, not, you know, keeping a grip on it. And it's about sharing those kind of things. And that's what we want. That's what I'm trying to build here. I'm trying to build an open, collaborative, you know, group of people, you know, a tribe, if you will, an open, collaborative tribe of people who can share these thoughts with each other. And whether there's one person watching or 10,000 people watching, I want to try to be the exact same way every single time. And, you know, I never want to lose sight of why I'm doing it. And it's for the juice. It's for the fragrance. It's for the love of the fragrance. And that's what this is all about. So thanks for watching, everybody. Cheers. I appreciate it. We kept it under an hour. Let me know if you have experience with Guy Robert. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you again next time with another video. Bye, guys.